Hi there guys, I'm going to be doing a review of the Razer Naga X, which is the most recent iteration of this mouse to come out after the Pro. There are some differences between the Pro and there are some differences between the OG Naga and the Hex that came before. Overall, I think this is a really good mouse though if you want a comfortable mouse that has a ton of side buttons on it. Just for starters, compared to the Pro, the X is wired. It comes with Razer's SpeedFlex cable. It doesn't tilt, the wheel doesn't tilt left and right for page up and page down like the Pro does, and you only get one bigger DPI button instead of two, like on the Death Adder V2 or on the Naga Pro. You also don't get the swappable side plates like you do on the Naga Pro, but the overall weight of the mouse is noticeably lighter. So I think personally, if I was going to use the Naga, I'd probably still use this one just because the weight difference is that meaningful for me. They've changed the layout. So the Naga mice used to come with the iconic wheel where you'd have the rubber grip in the middle and then you'd have kind of 6 chunky buttons around that. They've moved on to having this 12 button layout instead. Personally, I prefer the wheel. I like having somewhere designated to rest my thumb because when I'm playing games, especially shooters, I tend to grip the mouse pretty hard towards the bottom. And I do find personally I occasionally will misclick one of these buttons, but it's not that bad. You can put your thumb sort of in between the buttons and it's fine. I don't think it's a huge problem, but I do miss this wheel layout and I wish I would have preferred to have an updated wheel layout as opposed to the 12 button, but I think they're mostly focused on the MMO space and people that just want a ton of side buttons. The quality of the buttons it's good. I don't think it's outstanding. I think the 2 buttons on the Death Adder V2 are a little bit better, to press, but they're larger and they're textured and things of this nature. But these still are pretty clicky and they're squares, they're chunky. You can feel them going in, so I think these are pretty good side buttons. They're not terrible like on the old Zowie mice or the Super Light or something like that. The wheel's really good. It actually feels slightly smoother than the Death Adder V2 wheel to me, and for me, the Death Adder V2 wheel I actually wish was slightly more tactile. So this is a little bit on the smooth side for me, but I love what Razer does with the outside of their mouse wheels. I just think what they the texturing and the rubber they put on the outside feels really nice. And the middle click is great on this as well. I don't accidentally mis-scroll, the wheel. Some mice, I have that as a problem where the middle click is just really tough to actuate. And whenever I press it in, I end up accidentally scrolling the wheel. That happens a lot on the outset wheel for me, for example. I do think it's a little bit disappointing that there aren't 2 DPI buttons on this, mostly because for the type of person that is getting this mouse, I think they probably just want as many buttons on their mouse as possible. And the Pro to that end is a little bit better because you have, 2 buttons you can bind because the wheel tilts. And I thought I would hate that. I thought I would hate the wheel tilting or that it would just be gimmicky, but I actually liked it and I do kind of miss it now. And I hope when they revise the Death Adder that they actually do implement the tilting wheel on that. But if you just want as many buttons as possible, I'm not saying that these are, the most comfortable buttons to press on the top, but if you rebind them to keys, especially on this, because these are all numbered keys, if there were 2 buttons up here, you could bind them to mouse 1 and mouse 2, for example, something like that. I think I would have preferred that, but the actual side button layout I think I really would like is on the Pro, they have one of the side plates, which they said, I think at one point, that it was kind of the replacement for their wheel setup. One of the side plates kind of has a baseline like this, where you've got a place for your thumb to rest on the bottom. And then instead of having 2 big buttons like this, it's actually 6 buttons in an arc. And I think for me personally, that's the type of design I would prefer. But I think the execution on that side plate just isn't good enough for reasons I'll get into. But if it were me just saying, oh, how would I want it to be? I'd rather just remove one of these rows, have like a designated space for the thumb to go, and then maybe instead of having 8 buttons, make it 6, but in that way the buttons could actually be larger, and then kind of have them go in an arc. like an ergonomic curve, because I'm more on the camp personally of I would rather have fewer side buttons, but then have them all be bigger and comfortable to reach. And I do think they've done a good job with this in terms of if you're gonna have where my hand rests by default, the thumb is pretty far forward, and pretty much all 6 of these buttons I can hit pretty easily. And I find it's easy to move the thumb up and down, and it's, not too bad to move the thumb back. The problem comes where, for example, in the Death Adder, my issue with this mouse is my resting position where I align to groove, rest my fingers down. It's extremely comfortable to reach this button, but reaching the furthest back button is not very comfortable for me, because you basically have to shift your entire hand forward, and it's much easier for the thumb to go up and down and backwards, I find, than to go forwards, which isn't a problem if you choke up on the mouse and hold it further up like I know some people do, and it's a non-issue for them. But I like how they laid these out, because the default resting place that I have on this mouse, you can fairly comfortably reach these buttons. What I would love to see, though, in the future is on that Naga Pro, if they refresh this, I do want them to take that 6-button layout that they replaced the wheel with, where you've got the resting place for the thumb and it arcs over. The issue with that plate is it just feels cheap and flimsy. The buttons don't feel good, and the faces of those buttons are ridiculously small. So on the 12-button layout, you can see that these are squares, and these are actually pretty chunky buttons. Like you've got a face of a button to actually press. I prefer my buttons a little bigger than this, but at least it's there. On the Pro version, where they have that wheel replacement where they arc, they taper the buttons down, so there's almost no button face, and it just isn't comfortable to press those buttons at all, and the faces aren't textured or anything. So I just think that face needs another iteration to be good. Personally, I do miss the iconic wheel design, though. I would rather have an updated version of this than this. And they do have the Naga Trinity has an updated wheel design, but that's an older mouse, it's heavier, and it's worse in some other ways than this one. So I would still recommend this one overall, over the Trinity personally. And I would use this over the Pro purely because of the weight difference. Personally, I think the Pro is like more than 105 grams. And this one is, about the same weight, maybe just slightly heavier than the Death Adder V2. This is around 82 grams. One of the things I love about the Naga line is this mouse's main competition is, really, it's the Corsair Scimitar, it would seem to me. And there are things I like about that mouse more, and there are things about this mouse I like more. Overall, I prefer the Naga to the Scimitar because I just find it more comfortable in the hand. I think for my hand size and my grip style, which I'm a relaxed fingertip gripper, essentially, and I've only seen a small handful of mice that actually have these finger rests on the right side, where this finger goes here and your pinky just kind of goes on the side, and they have this rubber grip here now, which is really comfortable. I'm surprised more mice don't do this, because I find I like it a lot. I like it a lot, at least, I've complained a lot about, especially on smaller mice, for the way I like to grip mice. Even something like an EC2, I find a common problem I have is that I just don't feel like there's enough room on the right side to rest my ring and pinky fingers. And that is not an issue here at all, because they have this nice little protruding rest, and I do like that quite a bit. You get lighting that comes through on the side buttons as well, and I think that's a nice touch. The feet are great. I think Razer's most modern feet that they put on their mice are some of the best that I have used, and they seem a little bit thicker than what a lot of their competition is doing. Like on the Superlight, for example, one of my gripes was that the feet are good, but they're just too thin, and they wear down really, really fast. And they do surround the sensor with the feet, which I'm a big fan of that as well. The click implementation on this mouse, I don't know if they have optical V2s or something like that. I'm not sure if it's the same switches, but I do find I like the switch implementation, the click implementation, a little bit more on the Naga X than on the Death Adder V2. And I do think the clicks on this aren't bad. They're just, they're not some of my favorites. personally. I prefer the clicks in something like the EC2-C or the Superlight. Those mice have really nice click feel in my mind. None of Razer's mice do the recent Zowie thing where they tilt up the cable, and that's kind of a bummer to me because I just think that's such a nice detail, and I wish more mice did it. But nonetheless, I like the SpeedFlex cable. For me, the best stock cables I've used are probably those present on the most recent Zowie mice, like the -C variants of the EC1 and the EC2. But the SpeedFlex is really good, and it's between the SpeedFlex and that cable for me. I kind of go back and forth, but either one I feel like you can't go wrong. Yeah, I don't know. It's a really comfortable mouse, especially for, like, MMOs. They do not texture the shell on this like they do with the Death Adder, unfortunately. And I'm a big fan of that. I find a lot of mice these days, they just have perfectly smooth shells. The coating on this is fine. It's pretty good. I wish it was, given the subtle texturing of something like the Death Adder V2. Or, really, I wish everyone would just copy the coating of the Superlight, because the coating on that mouse is fantastic. I love touching it, and they should make all these mice with that. So, man, compared to this mouse, the old one is heavier. The wheel is awful. There's basically, you can't feel any defined steps on the wheel. They've come a long way, and I think the coating is worse. This one, the coating basically just feels like raw plastic. I don't even know if they put anything else on top of it. And the feet have worn down a lot on this one. But I think this mouse is really good. And I think this is one of those mice where you probably know if it's for you. People who buy the Naga are probably looking for a mouse with a lot of buttons. I do hope in the future they make a revised Naga Pro, where I'm not big on the whole swappable side plates thing, because it worked better than I thought. It worked a lot better than I anticipated on that mouse. And once it was locked in, it felt pretty solid. But the buttons on at least the other two side plates just felt kind of shallow, and I would have rather had just one implementation and then do it properly. And I feel like that's kind of what they've done. They took the better side plate from that, and then they've produced a pretty good implementation of it. So probably not for me. I've described kind of why I prefer other button layouts, but it's still really good. The Scimitar has some advantages over this. The Scimitar, you can shift the buttons forward or backwards, and I think that's a really nice feature because, I've complained about it before. Depending on how you grip your mouse, well, I've complained about it before on other mice, but depending on how you grip your mice and how big your hands are, my hands are about 19.5 by 10.5 centimeters. The ideal spot in my mind is I want my thumb to be aligned right in between these buttons, for example. And so the nice thing about being able to shift them backwards and forwards like you can on the Scimitar is that you have that option, and you can put it wherever is comfortable for you. I also like how they have like a cross-stitch grating on the Scimitar side buttons, which I just think is nice. I love when they texture things in that way. It's probably not a deal breaker for a lot of people, but I just like it personally. I don't know all of the internal specs when it comes to the sensor on this mouse. I think when I checked the spec page, it had a slightly lower max DPI setting than something like the Death Adder V2, but I've not noticed any issues with it, and I would doubt most people would notice. It does use optical switches, so there's no debounce delay. Again, that's one of those things where I would be surprised if most users would perceive, a 4 millisecond debounce delay, for example. But it is there if you want every shred of latency shaved off. But yeah, the click implementation on this does seem better to me than on the Death Adder V2. Makes me sad. I want this mouse to have that now. But anyway, for the Scimitar, I mostly prefer the Naga because I just think it's more comfortable. The Scimitar to me is not. It's not even, I can't even say it's uncomfortable in that class of mice, because I think most MMO mice, to my taste and preference, just aren't that ergonomically comfortable. But I really like what they've done with the Naga line, and I think this mouse is really comfortable. And I've talked about this a little bit in other videos, but I sort of like when mice have more of an ambi shape on the left, and then have the the support on the back right hump on the right. Just because if you hold the mouse really far forward and your hand isn't the correct size for a given mouse, then the hump doesn't line up right and it can kind of dig into the base of your thumb. And that doesn't happen if you have more of a egg or ambi-shaped left side to the mouse. So this is a surprisingly unique shape. It is a tall mouse. Some people don't like that. Some people would probably want a smaller mouse than this. For me, if my primary genre was MMOs or something where I would really get a lot of value out of having a mountainous amount of side buttons, then I might switch to this as a daily driver. My primary genre is FPS though, so I personally would rather use something like the Death Adder instead. In all these videos, I always leave something out. There's always something I forget to touch on. So check the comments underneath. If there's anything I forgot, then I will put it there. Also, same with the Death Adder. I do wish that they would take this big black bar. You don't need this much, maybe they do need this much space for whatever underlying hardware is inside, but I would like on the next revision if they took this big black bar and shrunk it to just the size of the button and then pushed it closer to the wheel. Because I like it closer to the wheel because I always rebind it to buttons to be used in game, and it's just easier to reach it with my fingers if it's closer to the wheel. Because I never switch my DPI in games, and it's part of why I don't really mind when mice like the Superlight or the EC2 don't have DPI switcher buttons on the top, because it just isn't that comfortable to reach them anyway, at least how they're positioned on most mice. And that is an area of regression I feel that Razer has made from some of their prior mice. The actual buttons themselves for the DPI buttons are higher quality now. They feel better to me, is what I mean when I say that. But the old ones, the buttons were pushed right up against the wheel, and you didn't have this long surrounding black bar. And I did prefer that personally. But anyway, thank you for your time. I hope this was helpful in some way. But thanks to my girlfriend for letting me try this. This is her mouse that she mains for a variety of titles. So anyway, have a good one, guys. Thank you. Bye.